So let's get right to it. I kind of want to get your thoughts on this on this Mel Kiper mock draft here with Tyler Guyton and Jonathan Brooks, who the Cowboys, if I'm not mistaken, both of those guys are 30 visits, or I know Brooks was, and they met with Guyton down at the Combine, correct?
Yeah, as far as the interest goes, the Cowboys definitely have interest in both of those guys. And you sitting here looking at the full list of official 30s, just to confirm Guyton is not on that list. But again, Cowboys definitely have interest in him, and then they most certainly have interest in Jonathan Brooks, whom they met with recently as an official 30 visit. And I typically don't subscribe to Mel Kiper's drafts because I got better things to do with my time than to watch what Mel Kiper is doing because he's, But nonetheless, this particular one, I think he's spot on as far as prioritizing some of the top needs for the Cowboys, be it offensive tackle and running back. Where he and I differ is in who he went with at offensive tackle and how soon he went at running back. But I see where his line of thought is. I can at least see what his line of thought is because when you're talking about Tyler Guyton, we'll start with Tyler Guyton, that he mocked us the first-round pick. When you talk about Tyler Guyton, 6'8", 322 pounds, prototypical, right? And he has some things that stand out in his game. He's, very good at pass pro. He has the athleticism that I heard you mention. Actually, for his size, he's superior athletic. Like that's just he's not supposed to be able to be that nimble with his footwork at that particular size. He has great range when he's pulling off of the edge. His engagement, when he can get engaged with the defenders, it's powerful stuff. His hands are powerful. But my problem there is when you're talking about getting a guy like Tyler Guyton, then my question becomes, who'd you potentially pass up on in order to pull that trigger, right? And I'm not simply just talking about the position at offensive tackle, but who was available at center. Because if you're talking about Tyler Guyton being on the board, then that tells, and that's your pick, that tells me that let's talk about the obvious ones that are gone. All right, so Joe Alt, he's gone out of Notre Dame. Fashanu, Penn State, gone. Latham, gone. Right. So now we're also talking about is Fuaga there, Fortanu,
he better not.
Mims, my guy.
Troy Fats and Fuaga better not be there, Pat, and they take some damn Tyler Guyton.
Say it again. I didn't hear you.
I said Troy Fachanu and Fuaga better not be there, and they take a damn Tyler Guyton.
Right. And see, that's what I mean. That's exactly my point. Like, look, in order for Tyler Guyton to be your pick, and one of two things happened here, okay? Either you wet the bed in making this pick, or there was this massive run on offensive tackles, right? But considering there's going to be a run on quarterbacks, as there always will be, right? Run on quarterbacks. If you combine with a run on offensive tackles, who based on my board, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you're at the 10th spot based on my board by the time you get the guy. And so that means 9 arguably more qualified offensive tackles are off the board, and the quarterback run has happened. So that means there's a good chance that Jackson Powers Johnson is staring you in the face then at that point, right? So that's my argument there, because I'm on the record, and I will always be on the record as saying center is more important than tackle. That does not mean tackle is not important. Obviously it is, especially left tackle on the quarterback's blind side, 100%. But if your tackles are elite but your center is average, doesn't really matter how elite your tackles are, because you're going to get blown up in the middle almost every single time anyway. Build from the inside out from your offensive line, and that's another reason I want Tyler Smith to remain at guard. I know he's open to going wherever they want him to go, but keep him at guard. That's why Mike McCarthy is hell-bent on trying to keep him at guard. But if you can get a better situation, whether it be a more ready-made player at offensive tackle than Tyler Guyton. And again, Guyton has the tools, he has the size, but then there are some things that I struggle with him. When you're looking at his film, his wingspan, for example, it's average. Okay, it's going to make it difficult. If you enjoyed the Tyron Smith era with that wingspan, you're not getting that with a Tyler Guyton. If you enjoyed Tyron Smith and even Tyler Smith when he popped out to left tackle, being able to open up the run lanes and kind of seal that edge. You're not necessarily getting that with Tyler Guyton because he struggles in run blocking. So I like where Kiper went as far as the prioritizing of the position, but I'm out
on the player,
so to speak, on who he selected based upon the variables that there should be someone else available that's of a higher guild, for lack of a better way to put it. I mean, and then, segueing right into Jonathan. You got me?
Yep. I'm saying well said. I feel you. I'm 100% agreeing here. Love the position, not in love with the player.
Right, and it's not a knock against Guyton. We're talking objectively here now. If the pick happened to be Tyler Guyton, I can point out several things, like you mentioned and like I mentioned. I can point out several things that are very intriguing and promising about Tyler Guyton. My problem is for the weaknesses that he has, for the opportunities of improvement that he has. There are others that are ranked higher than him that could also be available when the Cowboys go on the board late in the first round that don't have those deficiencies, that don't struggle in run blocking, that don't have an average wingspan. They have an elite wingspan, like an Amarius Mims or someone like that. And it doesn't matter what you do, folks. Your arms aren't growing any longer than they already are when you're an adult, right? So his arms are his arms. His wingspan is his wingspan. You can coach him up in run blocking and things like that, but those types of deficiencies aren't going to change. Now, when you did talk about, again, and I would prefer center over Tyler Guyton. You got to convince me that there's not a starting potential all-pro center staring you in the face late in the first round if Tyler Guyton's the pick. Like, you show me. But then when it comes to Jonathan Brooks, and I said this on an episode of Building the Board last week, I could very well see the Cowboys pulling the trigger in the second round on Jonathan Brooks. I could, because they like to roll the dice in the second round. They really do. Mm-hmm. And this is the guy coming off a torn ACL, and that's going to, cause him to fall a little bit as teams get a little bit wary. But at the same time, this is a guy who is a do-it-all back. I mean, he can run between the tackles and do the dirty work, the head in space. He can be a receiver out of the backfield. He can pass pro. I mean, he can do those things. And he showed his ability to produce in his first year as a full-time starter with the Longhorns last year. That being said, positionally speaking, Patrick Walker, don't want a running back before the third round. And here's why. I want you to address either the offensive line in the first round and maybe the second round, or depending on how things work out, why not give me an offensive lineman and a linebacker, right? Something to consider there, because I feel like running back, and I do expect them to address it in veteran free agency, and I do expect it to be a guy like either J.K. Dobbins or, again, Ezekiel Elliott is very much on the table. I expect those to be kind of midsummer signings if one of those were to happen. I think you'll be fine getting, or more than fine, getting a running back like in the third round. I think that the third round is where you start to say, okay, now let's get that running back, especially if you're able to trade back in one of the first two rounds, get your additional picks. Maybe that gets you your fourth-round pick back. Maybe that gets you a second pick in the third round. But then that makes things a lot more doable and a lot more feasible. But Jonathan Brooks, don't rule him out as a possible second-round pick. It's ready-made for the Cowboys, and Dr. Dan Cooper is the one who did his procedure on the torn ACL, so that means the Cowboys have a direct line to Jonathan Brooks.
You mentioned a position that I want to segue into our mailbag segment here. We're going to ask a couple questions. Got a couple of them from y'all. We got 4. I'll get 2 of them. Me and Pat will go back and forth on. And you talked about linebacker. And when I sent you this question, your emoji was hilarious. But I feel like it deserves to be talked about again, because this has been a hot button topic for literally since Micah Parsons has been drafted. Alex Bro over on YouTube said, why won't Dallas utilize Micah Parsons' talents at middle linebacker? Would you say he would be more effective in the position he was drafted for? He is undersized to be a full-time defensive end. You say what to that, Patrick No C. Walker?
My problem with that is he is too good of an edge rusher to try to commit him full-time to playing Mike in anybody's system, which just takes a lot of his effectiveness in disrupting the opponent's backfield right out of the equation. I have a massive problem with that. Can Micah Parsons play the Mike? Yeah, absolutely he can. He could play with Sam too. My point being, though, is you want him more often than not going off of that edge. And keep in mind, he's so dominant at the edge that sometimes he doesn't even have to run at the quarterback. The fact that he lined up on the edge and put his hand in the grass is immediately going to make that quarterback think about Micah Parsons. And guess what that does? That frees up, and guys who are blocking, trying to block. That frees up guys like DeMarcus Lawrence. That frees up guys like Oso Digizua. And when you start dropping back Micah Parsons to the second level, well, you just made things a hell of a lot easier for the opposing defense. Now all they have to account for is Tank and Osa, and it just makes it easier to double team a guy like Tank or throw extra coverage or extra blocking to the left side or in the middle. So you don't want that. You want guys to have to play honest and straight up and one-on-one as often as possible. And I will also say this as far as the undersized comment for being a full-time defensive end. Do you guys like T.J. Watt? Do you like T.J. Watt? Because the reason T.J. Watt's not here in Dallas is because Rod Marinelli thought he was undersized to be a full-time pass rusher off of the edge. And so we got Taco Charlton instead. So that Marinelli style of viewing Micah Parsons will ultimately get you nowhere. And we've seen that before. So focus less on Micah Parsons' size as a full-time DE. And also, let me tell you, walking past him several times a day, every single day, I don't know what undersized is to you guys, but that dude is a unit. But I would also say, just all jokes aside, throw that undersized stuff out of here when it comes to the skill set of Micah Parsons. You've seen what he can do. 99 quarterback pressures last year alone, and that's not counting what it would have been if some holding flags would have been called or any of the holding penalties would have been called. So let him eat from the edge and mix it up every once in a while, but not so much so that you're saying, oh, you're definitely a linebacker going for it. Like, no, that doesn't work for me. And it's ultimately not going to work for Micah Parsons either because he wants the defensive end bag. He doesn't want the linebacker bag. So it's a win-win situation if Mike Zimmer keeps him on the edge the majority of the reps.
It's like I said, it's a very interesting topic because I went back and forth with this. I do personally think Micah could be just as much of a playmaker at the second level, but here's the problem, and this is not a him problem. He's so talented, I think he'd be all-pro rusher, all-pro linebacker. The problem is if you move him to backer, you touched on it, you don't have nearly as good of a pass rush as you did. With all due respect to DeMarcus Lawrence, with all due respect to Sam Williams, your pass rush takes a massive hit, and pass rush rules right now. Your issue on defense is not Micah being undersized. It's not Micah not playing middle linebacker or playing defense end full time. It's that you didn't address the linebacker position to complement Micah. You didn't address the defensive tackle position enough to complement a Micah Parsons. So when you see teams get, Cowboys get run on, you immediately go to the star player and say, well, where are you at? Well, he's one person. Micah can't play defensive end, defensive tackle, and linebacker on the same play down in, down out. So, yeah, he could be an all-pro at middle linebacker, but how are you getting to the quarterback? Like, I love D-Law, but D-Law's not going to get 100 pass rush pressures and 16 sacks. It's not happening. Sam Williams is a huge question mark, Pat. So the Cowboys need to address around Micah before you have the conversation about, in my opinion, where you put him at permanently. Because either way, I think he can be an elite player. But if you don't have anybody to take Micah's spot, how do you move him from defense end?
But you make an excellent point because it's overcompensation. Think about it from the aspect of the human anatomy, right? Let's say your hamstrings are weak, right? So what is that going to require? That's going to require your lower back to do more work. It's going to require your knee to do more work because maybe the quads are stronger than the hams, et cetera, et cetera. And then that potentially leads to another issue down the road. Now, put that analogy into what we're talking about with Micah Parsons. Well, the reason people are wondering if Micah Parsons should be moved back to linebacker is because guess what? You're weak at linebacker. Yep. So instead of moving Micah Parsons back to linebacker, which would
get better at
saying, hey, instead of looking at your quads and saying, become my hamstring. No, how about you work out your hamstring, right? How about you actually get you a linebacker core that can be as dominant as your defensive ends can be? That way you won't be looking at your future Hall of Fame pass rusher and saying, could you help us out at linebacker? Like, can I get a rib? Just one rib, Mike Parsons. Like, no, tell him to get on the end and dominate the pass rush, and then you look at Mike Zimmer, Mike McCarthy, Will McClay in the front office, and you challenge them to take this linebacker core to the next level where it should be. That way you have balance, and now your hamstrings are firing on all cylinders. Your quads are strong. Your lower back, which would be your secondary, in a defensive counterpart, that's working well. So now the human body is firing as it should be. But don't look at your deficiency, and instead of fixing the deficiency, you ask the guy who's excelling at this other position to help you there. Like, no, fix the problem, or you're going to create another problem, like you said, Steel. Move him to linebacker, then maybe Sam Williams takes the leap. Maybe he doesn't. Or maybe he takes the leap, but he becomes even more of a penalty magnet. And now you're trying to figure out in real time as the season progresses, or worst case, you're trying to figure it out late December or in January in a playoff game. Well, then it's too late to figure it out. It's already figured out at the defensive end, even with the loss of Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler. You got it figured out. Bookends, Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence. There you go. You just need to figure out the rotation behind them. Sam Williams, maybe you get Junior Fehoko in there. I'd say draft another guy maybe on day 3. Figure that out. But when it comes to the linebackers, I want you to find – you got Eric Kendricks, cool, wonderful, lovely. I believe he'll impact the room. Damone Clark needs to take another stride forward. But you also need – and DeMarvion Overshown, he's coming back. But you need to make sure that that linebacker core is stout, and not because you're taking away from your pass rush on the defensive end. If you're doing that, you're hustling backwards.
Yep. I mean, very well said, man. The Cowboys need to add to Eric Kendricks, need to add to that linebacker, Major Edgerrin Cooper or somebody. And I think that's what it seems like they're going to do. Look, it's early. We don't know. We got to get to camp or whatnot. But it feels like when they brought in an Eric Kendricks, he's going to be your Mike, and they're going to count on the young bucks or potential draft pick. But they did the first step. Granted, it's small because Kendricks not going to be here long. But last year, previous years, I think you needed to move him around some edge, some linebacker because of the deficiencies, and he was doing both pretty well. But moving forward, I definitely think you need to figure out what you want to do with him. Do you want him to be a utility moonlight linebacker guy, or do you want him full-time edge? If you're going to be full-time edge, and you have to, Cowboys, you have to address that linebacker position for the future. I can almost guarantee you, if you insert real linebackers, insert real defensive tackles in a scheme, we won't even be talking about Micah Parsons having to move back and forth, because you have fixed everything else around him, instead of saying, hey, I need you to be Superman every other play, linebacker DE. That's the issue. It's not Micah Parsons himself.
Right, and this is – I want to be clear in what I'm saying here. My problem is any question that would – or any plan that would have Micah Parsons moving to linebacker, let's say full-time with air quotes, which would be the majority of his snaps being at linebacker. I have a problem with that. What I would prefer in a perfect world is that Micah Parsons doesn't have a title. He's simply W for weapon, which is you line him up on the defensive end on one snap, maybe when it's a 4-man front. When it's a 3-man front, he comes more interior. I love what Dan Quinn was able to do last year in moving him zero tech, sometimes lining him right up against the nose. That's what I want to see from Micah Parsons, right? Move him along the line, inside, outside, zero. Sometimes he's at 1, sometimes he's at 3, sometimes he's back at 5, and then you sprinkle in, and my key phrase is sprinkle in some off-ball duties to keep the opposing offense guessing. But what I am completely out on is Micah Parsons seeing the majority of his snaps at linebacker, when you know good and damn well how impactful he is, literally, statistically, the most impactful defensive end pass rusher in the league, and that includes T.J. Watt. Watt gets more sacks, but who gets more pressures? And I'm not saying that to downplay what Watt does. I'm simply saying when you're talking about absolute disruption, both their A and B, and Watt is better at taking down the quarterback, and Micah is better at getting back there to take down the quarterback, which is kind of a weird designation. But that's what I'm saying when it comes to Micah Parsons. Keep moving him around. But if you're looking at Micah and saying, help us out by becoming a linebacker again full time, no, you lost me. You lost me. And you'll never find that compass. So
and closing on this one, because a lot of people are going to say, well, he disappears in the second half of the season. Well, that didn't happen last year, okay? You could argue that the previous years because he wasn't equipped, but he did get himself equipped to play full-time DE. And last year he led T.J. Watt, Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa and Max Crosby in pressures over the last 9 games, and he was only second to Watt and Bosa in total sacks. He had more sacks than Crosby and Garrett in the last 9 games of the season. So he wasn't some disappearing act in the second half of the season. Now, you want to talk about playoffs, everybody pretty much got whooped on in the playoffs, but I just kind of wanted to put that myth to bed that, oh, well, he's not here or there in the second. He gets worn down. Well, is Myles Garrett worn down? Should you move him? Is Max Crosby worn down? Should you move him? So we kind of get stuck in this funnel in regards to Micah Parsons. He's an amazing player. He's going to be another All-Pro this year. I'm not worried about Micah.
The bottom line is, and we'll move on from the question. The bottom line is this. The reason you don't hear people talking about possibly moving Max Crosby to linebacker, T.J. Watt full-time to linebacker, Joey Bosa obviously not, it's not simply because of the size, and not Watt notwithstanding because he's the size of an off-ball linebacker. Again, that's the reason he's not in Dallas, because Marinelli didn't see his size as something he could utilize as a pass rusher. Whoop, go figure. But it's more so because what's not lacking in Pittsburgh for the most part? They're not really lacking linebacker play, right? Las Vegas Raiders, for the most part, they got some dudes that can play behind Max Crosby. Obviously, the Cleveland Browns have dudes that can play behind Myles Garrett. When you talk about a guy like J.O.K., for example, they have linebackers. What did you not have in Dallas? What did you not have last year? Linebackers. Yep. Right? That's why people are trying to figure out, okay, how can we bolster the linebacker core? Oh, yeah, let's use Micah Parsons. Wrong train of thought. You know how you bolster the linebacker core? You should have been maybe more active in free agency. But, okay, again, I like the Eric Kendrick signing. That's a start. But now show me what you're going to do in the draft at the position. This is how you fix it. And then you look at DeMarvion Overshown, and you tell that young man, I need you as quickly as possible without rushing the process to try to get back to the preseason form we saw you in before you tore your ACL. Because the sooner you can do that, the more dominant this linebacker core can be alongside Damone Clark and a former All-Pro like Eric Kendricks. But that's how you fix linebacker. You don't fix it by breaking another position.
The only way you even entertain full-time move like that is if you would have brought in a Danielle Hunter. I mean, that's it. Because you replace one of the top 10 pass rushers with another top 10 pass rusher, not replace him with a question mark in Sam Williams. All you're doing is you're just mitigating another position and making one worse. It just makes no sense to me. Full-time wise, it makes no sense. I'd move him around, but full-time wise, it makes no sense to do that. Let's keep it going with these questions here. Interesting question by I'm sorry, let me get your name here, brother. Joshua over on Instagram. He said, will the Cowboys continue to involve a fullback in their offense and maybe get one in undrafted free agency? Continue to involve is interesting because I don't think they involved Hunter Lipke that much until like that Washington game. They kind of really got him going. But, fullback. You think they're going to get one, or we're going to roll with Hunter again?
I think fullback is probably the position that's one of the least important to them right now for a couple reasons. One, Hunter Lipke, he is on the team, right? He had a strong back half of his rookie season, kind of stumbled, in the first half, and then especially when you talk about what happened in Miami against the Dolphins with that fumbled handoff that helped cost the Cowboys that game ultimately. But then you can also put that blame on, Tony Pollard for not turning upfield when he got to the left side instead of trying to race the guy to the pylon. But nonetheless, Hunter Lipke, once he got out of that doghouse with Mike McCarthy due to that fumble, he started getting some touches again. And so you have a fullback, an effective fullback, who at least has potential to continue to improve. So the Cowboys aren't really thinking about adding to that position via free agency, and most certainly not in the draft. They only have 7 draft picks going in, and they're trying to get more, but they're not trying to get more so they can grab a fullback. Now, could you see one as a middle priority, low priority, undrafted free agent to kind of challenge Hunter Lipke, or at least try to help push his progression and speed up his progression this summer? Absolutely, you could see that, but they're not necessarily pressed for that. And then, of course, when you look at Lipke, some of his, at least half of his snaps aren't necessarily at the traditional fullback role. Like, you see him as the lead blocker at times. You see him as kind of like doing some pass pro back there in the two-back set, whatever. But at the same time, you've also seen him take snaps as a halfback. So they love his flexibility. They want to see more from him. Mike McCarthy is definitely a big fan of Hunter Lipke. So if you're asking how does the fullback position for Dallas look in 2024? It looks the same way it looked in 23, which is Hunter Luepke.
Yeah, I wish they would figure out exactly what they want to do with him, because it seemed like, oh, well, Hunter Luepke is going to be our little weapon X at fullback, right? He's going to do a little pass catching, a little running, a little blocking. And then we get to the season, and they're like, nah, you're a blocking fullback. And it took a while because that's not what he did at North Dakota State. He was more of like their halfback for real, their Mike Allstott per se, or Peyton Hillis. But then he got to the league, and they tried to make him a blocker early, and he struggled. But he looked much better in the back half, at least in that Washington game. He looked much better. They didn't really use him a ton in the Packers game, but I do wonder how they view him moving forward. Is he going to be your John Kuhn, who's a blocking fullback that you throw to a few times of the season and you hand the ball off to in the red zone, or is he going to be more, Peyton Hillis, Mike Allstott? I'm not saying he's one of those guys, but one of your bigger fullback, halfback types where you're handling the ball. I think they need to figure that out first.
Well, when it comes to Hunter Luepke and just when it comes to the fullback position in general with the Cowboys, let's kind of touch back on what we were talking about with the linebackers, right? Well, the reason that you needed Hunter Luepke to be more effective as your lead blocker when that's not necessarily what his bag was coming out of school is because you had two running backs who were so similar in skill set, and neither of those skill sets were that bully, right? You missed that bully with Ezekiel Elliott. You didn't go and try to get that bully in Derrick Henry none of this offseason. So because you didn't have that bully, that means you need the fullback to be more of that true fullback, more of that cone, more of the angle of cone, right? So absent that type of running back, your fullback needs to be doing more of the heavy lifting in like I formations and power sets and goal line and things like that. But if you were to get a running back who can reinsert that in complement to Rico Dowdle returning, then you'll be asking your fullback to do less of that and simply be more of a complementary piece. So it kind of goes hand in hand. The smaller your running backs are, the bigger your fullback better be, and or the better your offensive line better be. The more mass and more ability to get into those A and B gaps and get yards after contact at the line of scrimmage that your running back has, the less likely you are to lean heavily, not completely, but to lean heavily on your fullback being dominant. So one hand washes the other there.
Man, excellent response there, Pat. I ain't going to keep it too long. I know you got some things to do this Friday, but we appreciate you as always, good brother, coming through, man.
No, it's fun as always, man. And let me get that plate. I need it foiled correctly, at the cookout. Do me the right way, man. Shouts out to Hattie B's.
Shouts out to Hattie B's and shouts out to Patrick No.C. Walker, DallasCowboys.com. Enjoy your weekend, bro.
All right, bro. See you next time.
Yes, sir.